I'm Dr. Susan Eirich, and welcome to this conservation conversation. These conversations are designed to contemplate our collective journey together and how best we can find and then maintain our individual paths. The ultimate goal is action arising from a shift in perception that all life is sacred, and creating a community of practice that grows and supports each other through our actions. We're delighted you're here. So I recently returned from Todi, Italy, a small Renaissance town in northern Italy in the middle of the country. And it was very interesting. It was a combination of conference retreat. We were all there together for a full week, day and night, in one hotel, which was actually a converted convent. So we were there 24 hours a day, basically, from early morning eating breakfast together, meeting, lunch, dinner, evening, well into the night. One of the things that was so interesting to me was the way it was structured. After I went to Todi, I went to Sun Valley, which was a conference designed by an American. And the difference was striking in terms of how the two conferences were done. One was both trying to deal with the current crises, emotional, human, climate change, etc. The one in Todi, the goal was to help develop emerging world leaders, to develop them as full people, because most of our world leaders come from academia, where they're trained in one narrow discipline. They're not trained deeply in arts or humanities or ethics. And they're really ill-prepared to deal with the crises of current day. Plus, how many leaders can you think of around the world who deeply care about sustainability, ethics, etc.? They're just not their major focus. And the goal of this conference in Todi was to change that, to help develop fully rounded people. And I never thought I'd be interested in something like the structure of a conference, but I suddenly became interested when I saw the difference between the two. So the structure of the one in Italy was absolutely brilliant, world-class speakers, and I'll share a little bit about what they said. First thing in the morning after breakfast. And immediately after that, we broke into small discussion groups so that we could really go into depth about each topic. After lunch, after all the intellectual and discussions and insights from it, after lunch, you had options of art, stone sculpture, dance, drumming, holotropic breathing, which is an interesting type of breathing that was developed by the guy who first studied LSD, and then it was not allowed anymore. So he developed holotropic breathing, with a special kind of deep breathing where you can get to a similar state without any drugs, altered states of consciousness in effect, and dance. So the afternoon was developing the other side of the brain, the whole person, the nonverbal, a chance to really take and digest the stuff from the morning. And then the evening were discussions when all kinds of interesting things happened. The conference in Sun Valley, I was delighted to be there, delighted to speak, delighted by the whole thing, but it was really different because it was really a left brain conference. Brilliant, totally world-class researchers on climate change, deeply caring, no difference in that. But it was packed from morning to night. Literally weren't even any coffee breaks. You had to get up if you wanted to go. During lunch, everyone ate together, and that was nice, and dinner. So what it did was give you a deep opportunity to deeply absorb in Italy, and absorb left brain, right brain, coordinate the two, let it let it digest. And again, it was a week isolated from everything else. It was from 9 in the morning till 5 at night, straight one talk after another, after another, after another, after another. Done for many reasons. One is the powerful people who were there didn't have much time. They could only fly in and out because there's so much to deal with. It was brilliantly designed because it dealt with everything from the incredible young high school students who are suing the United States for clean air successfully to date, to what's happening, really state-of-the-art, what's happening with plastic, to what's happening with insurance companies. I'll talk about it a little more later if you're interested. Insurance companies being on the front lines, really, when you think about it, of what's happening. So it was just packed. And it simply wasn't as effective. I was talking with a person the other day who said, brain research says we can take information in our frontal, information like left brain type information for about 90 minutes. And then we need to have a short break. So it didn't really honor the whole person and the way we learn to really start to make deep differences. In a sense, it's the way of trying to make changes based on technology, based on left brain, based on, okay, how do we fix things? There wasn't an element of, wait a minute, why do we have to fix things in the first place? What's going on underneath? What are our basic values that set this up? The deeper things that if we change those, we don't have to fix all these other things because they won't be going wrong the same way. As I was discussing it with her, the third person, whose name is Karen, I said, really what we need to start thinking about are brainwave patterns. The technology, I've got to study this a little more to get the right names, but technology basically uses say the beta brainwave, very, very busy, focus on fixing and doing technology brain. Meditation goes very, very deep. Sometimes if you go really deep, you're barely conscious. How do we operate so that I think what we need to do, so the spirituality, which is the deep, slow ones, and there's a busy, active, doing technology, which is very fast ones, somewhere we have to be able to integrate the two if we're really going to make good decisions. So it's another way of talking about spirituality and activism, or as Andrew Harvey tries to make it, spiritual activism. As humans, we need to educate ourselves and educate our children into different ways of using our brain so that we're alert and aware. And really, as I often try to say, we're listening with some back of our brain to all life. We're not lost in just human life or in our own life, which is even more painful if we're just lost in our own needs. But we always are aware and embedded in the larger system. And from there, start to make decisions, which may end up being specific or technological, but they're grounded in something else and they're done from that place. And the results are very different. So that discussion was, okay, so how do we actually help ourselves and our fellow humans make that shift to where we're in an intelligent state of awareness, in which case we'd make very different ecological decisions, but we also have much more access to creative thought about how to deal with and solve the problems that we have. So that's my little, how do you design a conference discussion? The people who spoke in Todi varied from a brilliant child pediatrician who in the last 10 years has given all his time and energy to understanding the impact of environmental pesticides in the developing brain. And he said basically we're a time bomb because they've gotten much worse. And the increase in depression, Alzheimer's, cancer, asthma, autism is just beginning to start to do this enormous spike. Basically, there's been like a 1,000-fold increase in all these diseases. Here he is. Okay, neurotoxic agents, heavy metals in the air in our cities. 1.4 children with autism in 2010. 1.7 in 2014, one in 1,500 in the 80s. So from 1 in 1,500 in the 80s to 1 in 40 children in 2014, an enormous increase. And he says the neuropsychiatric disorders like major depressive disorder, etc., he thinks are a result of a mismatch because it affects the developing brain in the fetus, a lot of these things. And there's a mismatch, and we're going to have a whole bunch of people who are really unable to think clearly. And that's not going to be too good given the crises we find. But he said, interestingly, and I didn't have a chance to talk with him much, but he's extremely accessible if you want to research it later. And Chelsea will write all of the contact information down if you want. Interestingly, they did research and they discovered if the mother meditates intensely during a particular 3-month period of her pregnancy, she can somewhat mitigate the screwed up wiring that happens. There are things he can do, things that we can do. So he's passionate at the moment. I promised I'd help him as much as I could, simply getting this information out somehow to young mothers. The dangers and things they can actually try to do to help the developing fetuses. So you go from there to a guy called Marko Pogacnik, a Slovenian guy who speaks all over the world about Gaia and Earth and how we can help heal the Earth, and that there are perhaps he doesn't think perhaps there are acupuncture points on the Earth where the Earth itself has been injured, and we can help heal the Earth if we go to those points. He has an interesting little blurb here that he says, his perception of climate change and Earth changes is that it's not a horror, but it's actually that the Earth is consciously trying to decompose the closed space of reality, meaning regular reality the way we see it in standard physics, the closed space of reality constructed to the last 5,000 years under patriarchy and rationality. That Gaia is consciously just decomposing this for us as a guiding creative force of the planet to construct a different space of reality, which is multidimensional, where we can begin to hear and connect to other levels of reality. Very interesting guy. He took us on walks and would connect us to various places around the town and certain trees and things. If you want to follow up, he's got like 20,000 books. And so that's a whole different kind of approach. There was another guy who spoke there called Federico Faggin, who talked about how this constant search for artificial intelligence is never going to fully work. It'll never be able to be conscious. He's a brilliant physicist. I'm very happy to hear it, that artificial intelligence will never become fully conscious. And his explanation for it was the nature of the universe and the nature of consciousness itself. And he says it's impossible to put into machines what's innate in the universe. And that basically consciousness itself is what he called an irreducible property of nature. Irreducible, even more fundamental than electric charge or spin. It's an innate part of the universe. Now, I think a lot of us already feel this, that the universe is in and of itself an intelligent entity. But this is a physicist showing some of the physics of it. He said, consciousness must be present in quantum fields if consciousness is innate in the universe. He actually talked about the idea of how did this actually begin, and that somehow there was just the beginning and something separated out, a quantum field separated out of the universe and began looking at itself. And from there developed, here's a much more elegant expression of this than I do. And again, you can look up all these talks I'm talking about are on YouTube under the Todi link. so you can hear all of these talks. But the idea that we ourselves are actually mini quantum fields of consciousness embedded in a much larger one. But we are the only known physical structures hosting consciousness. And so he says there must be all kinds of quantum systems we don't understand yet, and that physics is extremely limited. Again, sort of like that closed space of reality that Marko was talking about, that our current concepts of physics are just one tiny little bit of understanding of how the universe actually works. But I just love the idea of intelligence being everywhere. So that's a very quick summary of some of the things that happened. Again, all the talks are on YouTube. I've talked for a bit now, so if people beg me to, I'll talk a little bit about the Sun Valley more. But I think we might want to explore some of these ideas, and maybe some of you have some suggestions about how we can begin to integrate. And is it possible for us to operate all of our brainwaves at the same time, so we really have a full rounded grasp while we're actually listening to other bits of information, like the holographic breathing takes you, sort of transcends you out of yourself, and you start, from there you receive other types of knowledge, which we can then take to apply to our current day situation. So let's stop it there and see what you want to do.
All right, so we will go ahead and open up the conversation to the group. A few things to just remember is that we do ask that you remain muted unless you are sharing. And this is, and we also ask that once you're done sharing to go ahead and mute yourselves again to just kind of take care of background noise. And when you do share, we would like to know who you are and where you are. Feel free to ask questions in the chat box as well if you aren't able to speak. And then please do be mindful of each other, your comments, and keep them related to the topic of discussion. And we can continue to ask Susan questions about the Sun Valley Conference throughout this discussion as well. So with that, you all have the ability to unmute yourself.
Hi, I'm Marta Waterman, and I live in New York State in the country. Susan, you said that, I believe it was at Todi, that they were trying to figure out a way to educate world leaders into being more aware environmentally, ecologically, morally, spiritually, and so on. That's a pretty tall order, and I wondered if there were any concrete ideas about how to go that. I mean, you're basically up against higher education, which is very focused in one direction, which tends not to be moral and ethical and spiritual. So I was just curious if there were some concrete ideas about how to influence people who are influencing what's happening in the world. Thank you.
This conference was an attempt to do so. Interestingly, it had been going on for quite a few years, and there was a change in the university, and they decided this wasn't worth doing, and they stopped supporting it. And so for the last couple of years, they've had to try to develop a new nonprofit and develop it all on their own. As you say, up against it, the very thing that we need most at this time is exactly this kind of thing. And the support was ripped out from under it. I promised to try and help any way I could. It was such an impressive experience for me that it will stay with me for the rest of my life. And I think it was true for everyone there. To me, it just, I'm going to have to use the word enrages, because it enrages me that something like that is not supported. And that's so hard to keep it in the world. So I promised I would do anything I could. So the guy who started it, who's now 81, does not have to be doing this. Brilliant scientists start studying the origin of life and all. He was a scientist who started this and said, science isn't enough. He needs like $90,000, of which I think he has 40, $90,000 to put this on. Why is it such a struggle in this world to find $90,000 to do something so phenomenal? It's just, our values are so incredibly skewed when we waste so much. But to try and get more directly to your answer, I don't know the answer other than to design. One of the things I talked about, the reason I talked about designing conferences like this is because I think they do make an impact. To the extent that it's like I'm busy enough. I have enough to do trying to raise money for Earthfire, but I was moved enough that I want to help him. And I think that's true of many of the people there. The passion was so great and the commitment was so great. I can only say that each of one of us is a little seed. And several people who I met there came specifically because of how it was organized and who did it. So it's like a bit of a magnet. And what we need is lots of little magnets like that around the world. I don't know myself, because it was the first year I went, what's come out of it. For myself, there's a filmmaker who's going to come and work with me on Earthfire and trying to get the voices of the animals out. That was an immediate thing, and we'll see how that works. He just finished a 10-year project with PBS on human voices and how important it was to be able to speak our voice. And as we met there one evening, late at night, in the heat, over a glass of wine, turned out that he just finished this project and he was in limbo thinking about what did he want to do next. And we were just chatting and suddenly something connected that, well, he could think about animal voices. And now he's going to come and do some initial filming. So that's an example of something that can happen. And a conference that pulls in, isn't just left brain information about what's happening with climate change and what to do, that pulls in this other stuff, has this ability to make all kinds of things happen that might not otherwise. I mean, what are the chances? I didn't even particularly like the guy. I just happened to sit down next to him, and then I liked him more. But my first impression wasn't interested at all. And in 5 minutes, a connection was made because of the setting and how the humans interacted and the openness and the different levels that were opened from the dance and the holotropic breathing and then the nature of conscious, all of that. So, my comment is, why don't each of you set one up? Mm-hmm. Or write to him and ask him how you can help him. But I think when you get to that kind of overall interaction, the things that happen might not be exactly traceable in a left brain kind of way, but all kinds of interesting creative things start happening. That's not a great answer, but it's what I have for now.
Well, I think that's a perfect answer, because that really directly relates to what you were saying about consciousness. And that's pervasive, it's everywhere. There have been studies saying that there is consciousness in each atom. So we live in a conscious universe, and hopefully this kind of approach and consciousness is communicated even beyond words. So let's just keep up the good fight. Thank you.
It was strong. It was very, very strong. And so I can't help but believe it's doing something. Enough? Who knows? at Sun Valley, they were speaking of things like, there were quite a few advisors to very wealthy people, very wealthy companies, talking about how to help people and companies invest in things that are for life. How we need to look at our own portfolios, even if they're only $5, to look at our own portfolios, because they said we might be fighting or marching against something on Friday that on Monday our portfolios are fighting against. And that is so hidden that we might not know that it's an oil company. You have to actually go and do due diligence and look, what is your money doing? So a completely different approach from Todi. Out in our current world, the Western world that we understand, they would advise wealthy individuals and corporations how to do good with their money. And then they would also do the research about where do we put money in order to do good. So that would be one of a totally different field. Another one was the discussion of plastic and how there is no such thing as a way. Plastic is never put away anywhere, even in another country, that every bit of plastic ever created is still on the earth because nature can't break it down. And it just breaks down into smaller and smaller pieces. Each time it breaks down, it gives off more fumes. So it's like almost endlessly giving fumes into global warming. And then it enters the food chain, and there was a slide of a little microorganism eating a piece of plastic, teeny, teeny, teeny. And you could see it, and then how the microorganism gets eaten by a fish, up the chain into everything. And then it's everywhere. And what do we do about it since you can't take it out? And then someone piped up and said, you know, because of the beginning change to the fossil fuel industries beginning to see that we're moving away from fossil fuels with renewables, how can they make money? They're trying to make more and more plastic because it's cheap. So for me, the practical things like how do you put pressure on the companies and all. And then there's a fundamental underlying question of how do we have human beings on the earth that callous? And how do we allow it to happen? And how can we change the ethos so that they're not allowed to do that anymore? That it becomes culturally toxic for them to do that. So that's a very different level of operating. This is one where I'm a little more comfortable for who I am. I think we need every single level of operating. There was a wonderful story there. And these are all online also. They may not be posted yet because the conference just finished a couple of days ago. But there was a white guy from the Amazon who married into an Amazon tribe and is trying to protect the Amazon. As of July 11th, they won this major victory and protected something like 500,000 acres of the Amazon, of their land. And the way they won it, this quote, Stone Age tribe, which ironically I visited like 40 years ago, just at the time of human contact. So I have all these pictures from then. But this Stone Age tribe, so they're still using blowguns, they were then even more, is using drones to monitor the periphery for illegal activity, and they're using social media. So through social media and drones, and the help of this guy and his brilliant wife that he married into, they saved all that land. And he had an interesting perspective that we think, oh, we've got to help the poor natives and protect them and the indigenous rights, these disappearing people. First of all, they're damn smart. But the other thing is, he said, actually, they're protecting us. They're protecting the Amazon. We should protect them so that they can continue protecting us. And that was a very nice reversal. And the kids blew me away. 4 articulate kids of the 21 that are suing the government. I mean, if our world was in their hands, we'd be in good shape. I think they started when they were 12. They're like a variation of Greta Thunberg. Just phenomenal, clear-headed, persistent. They just don't give up. They're taking on the US government. And so far, they've won the right to a trial, which the government managed to put off. It was supposed to be last October, but they've put it off, but they haven't been able to cancel it. So that's it. More comments, questions?
I do.
Hi, Val.
Hi. Hi, Susan. Thank you, Susan and Chelsea. I don't think we can accomplish what it is that you are asking if the myth of separation continues.
Mm.
And I recently came back from Cortez. This is Val Murray. I'm in Victoria. I recently came back from a program on Cortez Island at a place called Hollyhock. Incredibly beautiful waterfront property, and is devoted to really exploring what it is that you're talking about in a place that is so conducive to what you're talking about. The program that I attended was Council of Water and Trees. Mm-hmm. And it was a marriage between the way of council and forest bathing. And because we situated ourselves within a forest and then, shall I say, we explored practices of forest bathing, we were already in a setting that was conducive to different levels of consciousness. We started by settling into the forest, and then we did a practice all in silence called What's in Motion, and we looked for every single thing that was moving. It was wild. People think that if you take a quiet walk in the forest that it's therapeutic, but not if your brain is carried on with what's on your grocery list or you're on your phone. Right. I see that all the time walking the dogs. People could be anywhere. And then we looked for a space, and the practice is called Find a Room. And everybody, there were 14 in the group, everybody again in silence went and found a place in the forest that suggested a room. And then after that, we got together, we took 2 people, there were groups of 3, and we introduced one another to our rooms. Then we came back and held council and had a tea ceremony. So I think having a setting that is conducive to a real emotional reciprocal connection to the things that you're talking about is really key. It's such an important question because we want so much for things to happen quickly. We know that time is short, and we tend to talk at people about what's important. But bringing people along and having them experience that deep emotional shift, I think requires a setting that is consistent with the message.
I agree.
Well, I'll tell you, I fell in love. Mm-hmm. It was pretty amazing what came out of this. For 4 days, we were in reciprocal relationship with the deer, the ravens, the whales, the ocean. The food was magnificent. The lodge, the garden was magnificent. Everything was consistent with what you're speaking of. Not everyone has the willingness or the financial ability to attend a place like that. I feel it's important to put personally my resources into going to places like that because I want to keep shifting into a place where that desire to convey a reciprocal relationship is consistent with the setting in which I do that. And I can't do it in a place like that. So the place that I do it is here in Victoria at the Quaker Friendship Center. And I do the best I can with ceremony, with inviting people into deep reflection, with listening and speaking from the heart. And I line the entire room with 11 by 17 images of grizzly bears, so that at least another species is present. And it just seems to shift people into something else without even thinking about it. And that, to me, I think is really the key, is without thinking about it, we are deepening our own practice of relationship with all life. But it's a very small example. I'm sure that you can do something much greater, but we all have to do something, don't we?
Don't minimize what you just did.
Oh, I'm not minimizing, but certainly it is a small example, a small local example. And if there were many small local examples,
Yes, exactly.
then I can see those, the weaving.
Yes.
The weaving of it. I'd love to be part of something like that, planning something like that, where the structure is resonant with the message, as opposed to people stridently beating someone over the head with the message. Because what I've found in the work that I've done is often I am forced to use the language of my, quote, opponents, unquote.
Yeah.
And that language, like words like sustainable and environment and carrying capacity, do not express my worldview.
Right.
And so it's difficult, but if we could seed different locations in small communities that were practicing something consistent with the message, so that the structure was consistent with the message, as you are describing so beautifully. I am very impressed with your ability to remember this from such a long trip. Then that would be, I think that would have some very deep resonance.
I think that's a wonderful idea. I think that would make a big difference. And I hope you start one, and I hope everyone here either starts one or contacts you to think about how to start one, or get together, all of you, to start one. I think it's a great idea. Idea is the wrong word, and that's a much too shallow a response. I think it's do it.
Thank you, Susan. I'll be in touch.
Yeah. Being in emotional resonance, or being in resonance, really is the same thing as being in contact with the harmony of the universe. In that, if we're in resonance, then we're able to, in harmonic resonance, we're able to receive all kinds of different information and wisdom and perspectives, and not work from that one perspective that Marko Pogacnik talked about the extremely closed reality of the last 5,000 years. It's nice to see you, Betty.
It's nice. Hi, it's nice to be seen.
Do you have any comments or questions?
Oh, geez. All over the place. All over the. I wonder what I'm doing. I know what I'm doing, but it's not what it's not what you're talking about doing. I wish it were. I don't know how to make that happen. It was really fine that my friend put on at my birthday this past June. She put up something that asked people to make donations, and they did. And I didn't even realize they were doing it. But they put up $225 for Earthfire, and I hope that you got it. And how else can we do things? You can travel. I'm getting to the point where I don't think that I can travel as much anymore. I say hello to the ravens. I say hello to the deer before they jump out on the road in front of me. But that's not what you're talking about.
What I'm talking about is only one thing. I don't think anybody should feel that their contribution is little, because we don't know how it goes out, as Marta said. You know, if the universe is consciousness, you don't know how what you're doing is going out. You just have to do what feels good in your heart and what you can.
Okay. I will.
I'm curious, Susan, to hear about you kind of compare and contrasted the difference of in Todi conference and the Sun Valley conference. But it was really unique to me that both made a point of including young people or like emerging leaders. And did you find that there was similarities in the way that the students were relating with the mentors, if you will? Even though the conferences were set up very differently?
I don't know how to answer. I'm not sure I understand your question.
Well, I'm just curious how the involvement of the students might have differed based off of your impressions with the conference. Did you feel like that also maybe affected how the students were maybe being mentored?
I don't know how to answer that. I would say that the students at the Sun Valley conference, to some degree, mentored themselves. They weren't being mentored. It makes me want to think, almost cry with the power of it. They were the initiators.
Mm.
They were the leaders.
Mm-hmm.
The young people at the Todi conference were mostly PhD candidates because they wanted to keep it at a high level. And they were mentored by their professors in a traditional way. Their professors were helping them build their careers. These kids were building their own careers.
Mm-hmm.
That was what's so impressive. Actually, several of the ones at the Todi conference were in the more traditional model. And
which is really interesting,
yeah,
considering how you explain them.
Uh-huh. But those students blew me away. Oh, there's a video being made of it. Again, this will all be online. And the video, we saw a trailer of it, which was great. This is over 4 years that they've been fighting. And kids suing the government. Yeah, you know. And the video is going to come out next May, I think, for those of you who are interested in seeing that documentary of it. I mean, the human spirit is simply incredible, and it doesn't really matter what age.
It doesn't, but I do think it's really important. You know, we talk about what we can do as individuals, and I think educating and getting the youth involved is extremely important for something we can do. And so it's just interesting for me to hear what works and, you know, inclusive ways to bring people in to incite that passion, where, as you're talking about the students in Sun Valley, they're just born with it maybe, but a lot of students may need like a little, I think education is huge, just opening the eyesight of those students.
But those students are role models.
Absolutely.
Anyone else with comments or want me to explain any more about any of it?
It's Marta again. I would just love to hear more of your thoughts on everything. Obviously, this was many days of conference, and I would love to hear more of what your thoughts and observations were, if anybody else doesn't mind.
I was impressed with the Sun Valley Forum of what an interesting and courageous job she did of pulling together such an, it was risky, eclectic group of people from the Amazon, from someone from the Leo DiCaprio Foundation with their One Earth project, trying to document where on the Earth we must put our resources to save things that are the main oxygen creators and things like that whole plan. So I said the insurance companies. Now, when I go to a conference, I tend to go to everything. I mean, I really want to take full advantage of it. And I have to tell you that I was not excited about going to a forum on insurance. It was just not very interesting, but it actually really was. And I give her tremendous credit for that. And then we had military leaders talking about what's going to happen with climate change. How do we prepare? What happens as the seas open up and the Russians come in over the north, and as people are fighting over water and drought, and how do we prepare for it? And of course, what a lousy job our government is doing of it. But there was a very high level general and admiral, brilliant speaking there. So she had insurance people, she had admirals, she had this person from the Amazon, she had Leo DiCaprio there. Let me see if I can find where I put that. Because now I'm back in Italy and I can't remember what happened in Sun Valley. Talked about public lands. A large part of it was the finances. But the insurance companies were saying, basically they have to invest their funds in order to get a return so that they can be functional. And it's getting harder to know where to invest their funds, whether there's any safety or security. And some insurance companies are starting now to have to pull back because they're not going to be able to viably insure what's going to be increasing disasters. So the theme of the conference was transforming leadership, so we begin to think differently, and resilience for the future we want. And the military was talking about resilience, and the insurance companies were talking about resilience. So what do we do when they can't insure anymore? They didn't go there. They didn't go that far. They're just saying it's getting harder. But realistically, of course, it's going to be impossible. They won't be able to invest in enough. And also that it's a fairly significant part of the GNP insurance that we don't realize how big it is. But the thing that was most interesting was they said they're directly on the front lines. There's no denying because they get the claims from around the world of what's happening and they see it. And what's happening is much worse than what we hear in the media. And what's happening with the plastic is much worse. The plastic that we see on the surface of the ocean is pretty horrible. They showed pictures of waves of beaches with you couldn't see the waves. The waves were waves of plastic. And they said that's just 1%. The rest of it goes down into the ocean. And what do we do about it? But the insurance company was, in a sense, short thinking because it's not going to be that long before they're not going to be able to insure anymore. Too many wildfires, too many floods. So I think it was Val, something you said reminded me of Charles Eisenstein's work. What was it that you said right in the beginning, Val? It was about the idea that basically the whole system is likely to collapse. And what do we do? What do we do then? His attitude is that as it collapses, it's actually an enormous opportunity, particularly in his book, Sacred Economics, his idea that we might be able to redo the whole idea of money, which is completely insane, that we're at the end of this whole cycle of money, where people are just pursuing it madly for the sake of it. Actually, we don't need much. We need food, we need water, etc. And that we're about to collapse he ties economic and ecological collapse that's coming, and saying it's actually an enormous opportunity to develop a whole new economic system that's based on gifts and reciprocity and local economies. And but Val, do you remember what it was said right in the beginning of your talking about your time up there at Hollyhock?
I'm not sure what it was about the time at Hollyhock. I know that I started off by offering my view that nothing is going to change if the myth of separation.
That's what it was. Thank you. That's what it was. He talks about exactly that. If you haven't read his books, you'll love it. Particularly the book, which I think I mentioned last time, The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible.
Mm-hmm. I have read his work. Now, the other one who I admire is Dar Jamal. Now, you did an interview with him, and I've read his work. And he came to Victoria, to the University of Victoria, and gave a talk. And it was marvelous because it was a small group of people who attended, so we had them all to ourselves. And he spoke about, you will know this, Susan, from interviewing him, he spoke about how his final chapter, everything had been written in his book, Fire on Ice, or Ice on Fire. I'm sorry, I probably
The
got
End of
that
Ice.
Okay. But he talked about how his final chapter, he had an epiphany because of some people that he met, and simply has come to the conclusion that we don't know. And he doesn't follow it up with, we don't know, so maybe everything will be okay. He knows everything is not going to be okay, but we have to know how to live with this.
Mm-hmm.
And personally, I don't think we can avoid collapse, but I think that we could possibly avoid the worst case scenario within the 10 to 12 years if we can learn that we are human beings are one member of Earth's biotic community. And that's why I line my council gatherings with images of grizzly bears. Just to bring people to a different scale of understanding, and then through ceremony, deepen us into listening and speaking from the heart. Most people don't get that experience. That to be able to speak from the heart and have other people in the circle listen from the heart and want the very best for you to speak your truth in that moment. It is so rare.
And so healing.
So healing.
I think we're getting close to the end if anyone wants to say anything else. That person, one of the persons, Val, who changed his mind was one of the little blogs I wrote by Stan Rushworth. One of the persons who changed his mind was the Native American Stan, who had, I think the blog was called Schooled by a Stag. And he's a phenomenal writer. You might want to look up his books, Stan Rushworth, on Native American and a Native American perspective. Unflinching, beautifully written work. And it was he and one other person who helped change Dar in that last chapter. So Chelsea, is it close to time?
Yeah, we have just 2 minutes left. So if no one, 1 second, I see a question. So yes, I will be sending out an email with all of the information from tonight's conversation. So you will have resources that Susan has talked about. But yeah, thank you for writing in. But yeah, if no one has any other questions or comments to add, then we will go ahead and wrap up the evening. Again, thank you all so much for being here. These conversations are such an important time to come together. And we really look forward to them, and we appreciate your presence. So thank you, and we hope you can join us at our next conservation conversation. They're the third Wednesday of the month, so that'll be August 21st of next month. And the recording for tonight's conversation will be posted to our website. And the best way to keep in touch about happenings and events at Earthfire is through our newsletter. And you may do that also through our website. So thank you all, and we hope to see you next time.
Conservation Conversations are a production of the Earthfire Institute, a wildlife sanctuary and rehabilitation center whose mission is to change how people see and therefore treat wildlife and nature. Join us as we work toward becoming a committed and supportive community of all beings. Earthfire depends on your donations to continue these conversations. You can donate at our website, www.earthfireinstitute.org. The soundscapes are by Wild Sanctuary Presents, Bernie Krause and Philip Arberg. Thank you for listening. Please join us for these monthly conversations.